When you're scrolling through a sea of cheap subwoofers that promise thunder but end up sounding like a rattling kitchen drawer, it's easy to feel that sting of buyer's remorse before you even plug anything in. I've been there, staring at a $150 high-power sub that turns out to be more noise than music, and I know the hesitation that comes with spending a few $100s on something that sits in the corner of the room and never quite delivers. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Yamaha DXS15XLF is the kind of mid-range investment that tries to bridge that gap, and today I'm going to break down whether it actually feels like a smarter buy or just another pricey gimmick. First off, let's talk about the kind of setup most people have at home. If you already own a Yamaha multi-speaker system or a decent AV receiver with HDMI ARC, the DXS15XLF slots in without a hitch because it speaks the same DSP language Yamaha has been using for years. The sub is a self-contained 15-inch unit with a 4-inch voice coil, and that size is a sweet spot for living rooms that can accommodate a medium-sized cabinet but don't have the space for a 21-inch monster. In practice, I've found that the 15-inch driver can fill a 12-foot by 15-foot room with enough low end to feel the bass in your chest during a movie's explosion scene, yet it doesn't dominate the space the way larger subs can. The headline spec that gets the most attention is the 1600-watt Class D amplifier. In real life, that power translates into a headroom that lets the sub stay clean even when the main speakers are cranked up for a party playlist. I tested it with a 100-watt amp feeding the front speakers, and the DXS15XLF never started to distort, even when the bass line on Uptown Funk hit its peaks. That means you can push the overall system louder without fearing that the low frequencies will turn mushy. The downside is that the high-power stage does generate a bit more heat than a smaller sub, so you'll hear a faint fan whir if you sit close to the unit. It's not a deal-breaker, but it's something to be aware of if you plan to put the sub on a shelf right next to your TV. Yamaha's 96 kHz DSP and FIR filter are where the sub gets a little extra credibility. Most budget subs give you a single bass boost knob, but the DXS15XLF lets you dive into preset DSP functions or create your own curves through the Yamaha MusicCast app. In a practical sense, that means you can dial down the sub's output in the 3040 Hz range if your apartment walls start shaking neighbors, or you can push the 5570 Hz sweet spot higher for music that's more punchy. I spent a weekend tweaking the filter to match a small home theater setup, and the result was a bass response that felt tight and articulate rather than boomy. The only hitch is the learning curve. The app isn't as intuitive as a simple knob, and if you're not comfortable poking around with EQ curves, you might end up leaving the defaults, which are decent but not optimized for every room. Who should consider buying the DXS15XLF? If you already own Yamaha's ecosystem like the YAS209 soundbar, a MusicCast receiver, or any of their network speakers, this sub will integrate seamlessly, and you'll benefit from the shared DSP environment. It's also a solid choice for small to medium home theater enthusiasts who want that cinematic thump without splurging on a $2,000 dedicated sub. Musicians who need reliable low-frequency reinforcement for practice rooms will appreciate the clean power and the ability to fine-tune the response. On the other hand, if you're a casual listener who only watches TV a few hours a week, or if you live in a dorm where the floor is a concrete slab and you can't afford any rattling, you might be better off with a more modest 10-inch passive sub paired with a dedicated amp. Let's look at practical strengths. The built-in amp means no external power brick or separate amplifier to hunt for, which cuts down on cable clutter. The DSP presets include a cinema mode that boosts the low end just enough to make explosions feel immersive without overwhelming dialogue, and a music mode that smooths the response for a tighter bass line on pop tracks. The unit also has a front-facing volume control and phase switch, so you can quickly adjust for speaker placement, whether the sub is right against a wall or tucked into a corner. The cabinet itself is made of sturdy MDF with a matte finish that blends into most core, and the rear venting helps keep the internal temperature stable during long movie marathons. Every product has its trade-offs, and the DXS15XLF is no exception. The 33 Hz lower limit means you won't feel the deepest subsonic rumbles that some larger 21-inch subs can produce. If you're after the absolute lowest notes for a high-end home theater dedicated to sci-fi epics, you might notice a slight gap around 20 Hz. Also, the